Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Alexinator, and today I want to talk about a specific kind of video game that I think is having a bit of a moment right now. Cozy Witchy Games. Just a couple weeks ago, Little Witch in the Woods was finally released on Steam as early access. The devs at Sunny Side Up have been working on this cute little witch life sim since 2019, and it's one of the earlier games to have been featured by Wholesome Games. I haven't played it yet because I've been busy making this video, but I'm super excited to experience it for myself soon. I really like the concept of Cozy Witchy Games, so I've been keeping my eye on them, and I found out there's actually quite a few of them. Last year, we had Potion Craft in September, Witchtastic in October, and Witchwood and the Button Witch in December. All in all, these games are not that similar. Potion Craft is an alchemist simulator where you interact with your tools and ingredients to brew potions. Witchtastic is a co-op game a la Overcooked, but with magic potions instead. The Button Witch is a puzzle adventure game set at a magical academy, and while Witchwood can be seen as a life sim, it's more of an RPG and it's a bit more creepy than cute, which kind of makes it a lot more witchy in the traditional sense of the term. And honestly, it's one of my favorite things about Witchwood. I love the storybook art style and the bizarre ingredients like the Eye of Newt or the mummified head, and I quite enjoyed the devious spells and talismans that we get to craft in the game. Now, this isn't a Witchwood review, so let me get back on track. Earlier this year, we also had the Witch's Garden and the Hip Witch, both of which are slice-of-lifey witchy games. So we have Little Witch in the Woods, Potion Craft, Witchtastic, The Button Witch, Witchwood, Hip Witch, and The Witch's Garden. That's 7 witchy games in 7 months. Well, 7 that I found. And according to my research and calculations, there are 20 more upcoming ones for the next year or so. And I know that 20 isn't a huge number. I know that hundreds of platformers can come out in the exact same amount of time. But a cozier game with a focus on being a witch, that's a little more rare. After the boom of farming sims that followed the success of Stardew Valley, there seems to be a new trend developing here that features witches, magic, and potion making. And it got me wondering, what's up with that? And that is what I'm going to attempt to answer in this video. And I'm gonna do it in chapters. Chapter 1, let's go! Before we can talk about Cozy Witchy Games, we need to talk about cozy games in general. Cozy games, also known as wholesome games, usually feature a more laid-back gameplay experience, and usually offers players a more relaxing and light-hearted gaming experience. While wholesome games have been enjoying their time in the spotlight since early 2020 and the beginning of the Panini days, games that offer a more chill experience have existed for quite a while. Harvest Moon is usually credited as the first wholesome game. First released in Japan in 1996 for the Super Famicom console, it actually sold a decent amount for the time. Then in the year 2000 and 2001, the first Sims and Animal Crossing games released respectively, and I don't even have to tell you how much of a big hit they were, since they never stopped being popular, and they're still immensely successful franchises. However, there has definitely been a more recent outpour of wholesome games, and their growing popularity is undeniable. So, what's a wholesome game anyway? The term wholesome games has previously alluded to a pretty strict definition of cute, stress-free, and non-violent, but with time, the term has come to be more fluid. It's more of a vibe. Imagine this. It's a quiet fall afternoon. There's a thunderstorm happening outside. You're indoors, snuggled up in a fluffy blanket on the couch, holding a nice warm mug of hot chocolate. Your cat is cuddled up against your legs. Life is good. You're cozy. That's how wholesome games feel. And it's not just cute or non-violent, and it's definitely not all rainbows and puppies. I feel like wholesome games, much like fairy tales, are able to merge childlike wonder with more mature topics and create something truly magical. Some of my favorite wholesome games, like Spiritfarer and Behind the Frame, have very emotional aspects, and I think that makes them even more wholesome because of the way they help you connect with your feelings and process some heavier topics. At this point, the term wholesome games is very ambiguous and ever-evolving. It can refer to games that are very diverse in genre and style. So let's cut them some slack on the definition and just move on to the movement that wholesome games has spurred. Honestly, I don't think we can talk about wholesome games without talking about wholesome games. The team. In February 2019, Matthew Taylor started the Twitter account @_wholesome games as a way to curate games that he personally liked. It was an instant hit, and it prompted Taylor to create a Discord server with his colleagues James Tillman and Jacob Blumstein as a way to establish a hub for the kind of games that they enjoyed. Wholesome games. Today, the Wholesome Games team has grown. Their Twitter account boasts over 87,000 followers. They have a Steam curator page, a YouTube channel, which features trailers of upcoming cozy games, and of course, the Wholesome Direct. In the vein of Nintendo Direct presentations, Wholesome Directs are full-length indie game showcases with exclusive footage, interviews, and announcements. This year, the Wholesome Games team will host their 3rd annual Wholesome Direct. And the demand for wholesome games is definitely there. Stardew Valley, a quintessential wholesome game, has sold over 20 million copies since its release in 2016, and 5 million of these were sold since September 2021. It took 4 years for Stardew to pass the 10 million mark, and then it just doubled in the next 2. Oh, and we have to talk about Animal Crossing New Horizons. The game has sold over 37 million copies worldwide in a little over 2 years, and it hit Twitch like a truck. I don't think there was any other wholesome game that even came close to this level of popularity on Twitch before. I mean, Twitch hasn't always been the most welcoming when it comes to wholesome games, but Animal Crossing changed that and carved itself a spot at the top. Despite the game having been out for a couple of years now, it still remains one of the most watched games/categories on Twitch. It's even higher than hot tub streams right now as I'm writing the script for this video. The demand for wholesome games has been growing exponentially, and lately, supply has been catching up. The 2020 Wholesome Direct showcased over 50 games, the 2021 one over 70, and the one this year promises to showcase almost 100 games. Not to mention that their Steam curator page features over 400 games. So where are all these games coming from? Well, there are a couple factors at play here. Wholesome games aren't usually produced by AAA studios. They're usually indie games developed by small teams, sometimes even just one person. But this wasn't always a viable option. Not until the proliferation of university video game development programs, the growing accessibility of video game development tools and funding avenues, and the general decrease in video game development costs. I mean, there's no denying that crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter have not been playing a huge role here. In the early 2000s, people who grew up on video games were ready to try making their own games, and many of them had new exciting ideas to bring to the industry. And guess what? They didn't have to join the corporate world of AAA games if they didn't want to. They didn't have to get stuck working on games that didn't align with their ideas and values. They could make games that looked like them and catered to people like them. An important aspect of wholesome games, and to an extent indie games in general, is that they recognize the gaps in the gaming industry. They acknowledge that most games and games genres have been solely catering to a very specific existing group since the beginning of gaming times. Young white men. I think wholesome games developers are actively trying to cater to a wider audience and build a broader, more diverse and inclusive community, one that they themselves might be a part of. Approximately half of the game dev teams featured in the 2020 Wholesome Direct included at least one BIPOC core developer, 79% included at least one woman core developer, and 37% included at least one non-binary developer. Furthermore, there are usually rules in place within the wholesome games community to protect marginalized people from hatred and bigotry, and that can really appeal to an audience who may have never seen themselves represented in video games before. The comforting and validating experience that wholesome games offer has been especially appealing during the chaos of the last couple years. Wholesome games responded to a need for people to relax and take it easy during troubling times. They managed to become a refuge in uncertain times, an opportunity to escape the circumstances of a global pandemic, constant political unrest, raging climate crisis, and everyone's worsening mental health. And they were a gentle reminder to just take care of ourselves and breathe for a second. You know what else is an inclusive movement that resurges during times of social and political uncertainty? Witchcraft. Transition! I mean, this video is about Cozy Witchy Games, so it's high time we get to the witchy part. Let's get through a small, hopefully accurate analysis of modern witchcraft so we can then see how it intersects with wholesome games. Okay, so as cliche as this sounds, I did want to include a classic dictionary definition of a witch, and it did not disappoint in how narrow and confusing it was at the same time. So, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a witch can be A, a person, especially a woman, who is credited with having usually malignant supernatural powers. B, a woman who is believed to practice usually black magic, often with the aid of a devil or familiar. C, a practitioner of witchcraft, especially in adherence with a neo-pagan tradition or religion. D, a mean or ugly old woman. Or E, a charming or alluring girl or woman. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not gonna do it. According to an article by Sophie St. Thomas for Allure magazine, a witch is simply someone who is aware of their power and puts that power into action. I'm gonna go with that definition. Merriam-Webster can suck it today. While witchcraft has most commonly been associated with women, especially women who dared live outside the patriarchal heteronormative roles that society has assigned to us, a witch can be any person who falls anywhere on the gender spectrum. Here's a bit of history about the term witch. With the rise of male-centric Christianity in Europe in the Middle Ages and the growth of early capitalism, powerful women started to be demonized for existing. In fact, the word witch officially became a pejorative term around 1468 when German churchman Heinrich Kramer published Malleus Maleficarum, aka the Hammer for Witches, a medieval treatise on how to hunt witches. Witches being women who he deemed morally corrupt, which could mean that they were unwed, widowed, financially independent, healers, not Christian, or just too weird for Kramer. So in a way, witchcraft has always been synonymous with independence and power. So it makes sense that women and people from other marginalized groups who feel oppressed, persecuted, and othered by society feel a certain connection to witchcraft. In fact, it's become clear that witch has become kind of a synonym for feminist. According to Sofia Quaglia, a witch pushes back against heteronormative, family-oriented societal norms such as marriage and childbearing, focusing instead on reinforcing the bond between women. And if that's not Feminism 101, I don't know what is. I mean, there's been a connection between feminism and modern witchcraft in North America for quite some time. It's not a coincidence that witchcraft experienced a resurgence during the late 1960s and early 1970s during Woodstock, the second wave of feminism, and the sexual liberation movement. On Halloween 1968, a group of women for the organization Witch, Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, even took over Wall Street in black cloaks and pointy hats to protest capitalism. Since then, witchcraft has had its ups and downs in the limelight, with popularity spikes accompanying political and social instability and the distrust in establishments, such as following the Anita Hill hearings in the 90s, and again after Donald Trump's elections, and then again alongside the Me Too movement. I also feel like now that the term feminism is being used in corporate speak and as empty imagery in branding strategies, actual feminists and other dissidents might be trying to circumvent around the potentially negative connotations of the term. And what's a witch but a feminist with a little extra touch of empowerment? It is also most definitely a power move to take the pejorative term witch from the claws of the patriarchy and turn it into an empowering expression. Just like queer and slut before it, witch has been reclaimed and has made its way into the mainstream. The coven is the new squad. On Pinterest, pins related to witchcraft are up by 281% by Gen Z users. On Instagram, the hashtag Witches of Instagram has over 1.9 million posts, and on TikTok, the hashtag Witchcore has over 64 million views. Today, it seems everybody's a witch. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is practicing Wicca now. Today, people who identify as witches practice many faiths, and for some, embodying the archetype is more of a lifestyle than a religion. The concept of a witch is very fluid. It can embody a religious affiliation, a political act, a wellness regimen, or even just an aesthetic. An aesthetic that feels very nostalgic. We've established that there are a lot of witches on TikTok and Instagram, and based on that demographic, we can assume that a lot of these witches grew up on movies and shows like the Harry Potter franchise, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Hocus Pocus, Kiki's Delivery Service, Halloween Town, and even the Wizards of Waverly Place. And I don't mean to imply that today's witches are only in it for the aesthetic or the nostalgia, but I don't think we can deny that it's a contributing factor here. Nostalgia is a very comforting feeling. It helps counteract loneliness and promote feelings of belonging. And that's very appealing as a young adult maneuvering through the 2020s. So that, coupled with the flexibility and empowerment that modern witchcraft offers to already marginalized groups, has got to have something to do with the modern witchcraft boom. Today's witches were born into a world of increasingly polarized political beliefs, terrorism, and climate change. Today's witches are living through a global pandemic, the threat of World War III, and a very tangible climate crisis, amongst other horrible things. Dark times call for escapism, and perhaps that's something that witchcraft can offer. Oh, and wholesome games too. They're all about that escapism as well. Now imagine the power of witchy, wholesome games. I think you can see where I'm going at this point. Both wholesome games and modern witchcraft have brought comfort and a sense of escape to the tired people navigating the 2020s. And lucky for us, they're not mutually exclusive, and they build on each other perfectly. So let's review our bases here. We know that both the wholesome games and witchcraft communities are inclusive spaces and that their values align relatively well. Furthermore, we know that both movements were created from a need to separate from existing establishments, to cater more to marginalized minorities, and to comfort people who need a little extra TLC. Now let's talk about a couple more things that belong in the intersecting area of the wholesome games and witchcraft Venn diagram. I've already mentioned that wholesome games and witchcraft have overlapping values, so it's not really surprising that they interact in the realm of environmentalism. But let's talk games. Environmental video games are video games that, at the core of their design, mechanics, and aesthetics, promote ecological consciousness. Games like Alba, a wildlife adventure, Apico, and Beyond Blue immediately come to mind. Indie developers are often dedicated and impassioned. They rarely have investors telling them what to do, or AAA studio level restrictions when it comes to the topics that they want to cover. So they're pretty much free to do whatever they want. And as people who grew up being told about the threat of climate change and the importance of recycling, and people who are now experiencing the climate crisis firsthand, it's no wonder that they're making environmentally conscious games. I mean, I could argue that most witchy games are intrinsically environmentally conscious. Witchcraft is inherently connected to nature, from worshipping Mother Nature, the moon, and other celestial beings, to being proficient in botany and understanding the importance of all species coexistence. Witches tend to lead more natural and eco-conscious lives, and I feel like a lot of witchy life sims do a good job representing witches' relationships with their environment. I mean, a lot of Cozy Witchy games are also farming sims and/or involve material collecting and crafting. Resource management is key to being a good witch in the real world and in video games. And as eco-witches become an increasingly bigger part of the eco-justice movement, I can't wait for a Cozy Witchy game to reflect just that. Indie devs, this idea is free. Please give me a Cozy Eco-Witch game. Please. Next up. We've already kind of touched on the point that some modern witches are attracted to the movement due to the witchcore aesthetics. I'm in no position to judge. I mean, here's my Twitter profile picture. I wouldn't call myself a witch by any means, but I do understand the appeal of this aesthetic. According to the Aesthetics Wiki, witchcore is an aesthetic centered around the themes of witchcraft. It often involves how to perform spells, magic, or gem collecting, and it does have some elements of cottagecore. He just jumped on my lap. Hi. Hi, kitty. I have a cat now. I have a cat up here. According to the Aesthetics Wiki, witchcore is an aesthetic centered around the themes of witchcraft. It often involves how to perform spells, magic, or gem collecting, and it does have some elements of cottage and naturecore, since some of the aesthetics revolve around outdoor settings. While witchcore visuals vary by type of witchcraft, some overlapping elements are plants, forests, candles, tarot cards, wands, crystals, small glass bottles, tea, cats, skulls, old books, preferably leather-bound, the moon and other celestial beings, etc. I think you get the vibe. There are so many different kinds of aesthetics that play with witchcore visuals, and they're not all gothy. We have cottagecore, bubblegum witch, witchy academia, medieval fantasy, naturecore, Halloween, new age, dark fantasy, and the list goes on. Meanwhile, indie games, especially cozy indie games, tend to be very stylized and diverse in their aesthetic, and I think that's the perfect vessel for witchcore. I mean, look at Witchwood's art style. Its gothic storybook art style lends itself perfectly to the witchcore aesthetic. Also, upcoming witchy games Kittery Academy and Witchy Life Story have very different art styles from Witchwood and from each other, but they are stylized in such a way that conducts witchcore flawlessly in their own ways. In my opinion, indie games bringing forth such varied and non-realistic art styles was the perfect stepping stone toward the cozy witchy game aesthetic. Now, I've brushed on this next part very slightly when I was talking about how the current boom in witchcraft might be potentially partly attributed to a lot of Gen Z and millennial witches having grown up on witch media such as Hocus Pocus, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, The Craft, Charm, you know what I mean. And while witchcraft definitely has roots in genuine witchcraft practices, there's no denying that it was popularized to the masses by these witchy franchises. I mean, when you saw the dark academia pictures, I know what you thought about. And I think it's time we talk about Harry Potter. Specifically, Harry Potter's Fall from Grace. I'm sure a lot of millennial witches and game developers grew up on Harry Potter, and I'm sure a lot of them have fond memories of Hogwarts and the series' wizarding world. And I'm sure most of them are at best disappointed by the J.K. Rowling situation. Many YouTubers have already covered this topic in depth, and they all did a way better job than I ever could. I personally really like the videos by Sarah Z, James Somerton, and Kunken Dassner. Long story short, J.K. Rowling is a TERF and all her creations are tarnished by it. Not just because they were created by a bigot, but because they all reflect her bigotry to a certain extent. I mean, recently people have been discussing her two more recent media affiliations, The Secrets of Dumbledore, the third Fantastic Beasts movie, and Hogwarts Legacy, the open-world action RPG that promises to make your Harry Potter wizarding dreams come true. Slave allegory, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy included. Hogwarts Legacy may be an upcoming witchy game, but it's not going to make this list, because the foundation it's built on are the opposite of wholesome. If you want more information about the Harry Potter franchise's many controversies and J.K. Rowling's many wrong opinions, please watch any of these videos. I've never been a big Harry Potter fan, and I haven't done as much research about this as they all have. What I do want to talk about are indie cozy witchy games and their creators. If they grew up on Harry Potter, this is most likely heartbreaking to them. It's hard to reconcile the nostalgia evoked by this franchise with the awful reality of it. But as many people have brought up before, there's still lots of ways you can love Harry Potter without giving Joanne a cent. You can buy your merch from fan creators and artists. You can read fan fiction, or even better, consume other witchy media. You could even create your own witchy media. Oh wait, people are already doing this. I'm not saying Harry Potter's Fall from Grace is the biggest contributing factor to this witchy cozy game boom, but I definitely think it's a factor. Indie game devs are making their own games full of ideas and concepts based on their own personal experiences, and if they grew up on witchy media like Harry Potter, nothing is stopping them from making their own witchy, wizardy, potion-makey, magic schooly games, and actually make them non-problematic and wholesome. A lot of upcoming witchy games are very diverse and inclusive, and explore topics that HB wishes it could have, J.K. Rowling is probably glad it never did, and that the rest of us are really grateful that they are. So yeah, some indie game developers making their own witchy games might be witches themselves, or strong proponents of the witchcore aesthetics, or just big fans of the wonders of magic. Or maybe they already make wholesome games because of the inherent comfort and inclusiveness of these games, and they understand that witchcraft can add to that, especially with a touch of nostalgia. To me, Cozy Witchy Games make perfect sense. They're a perfect product of the evolution of both wholesome games and witchcraft and witchcore. Just like witchcore has found a place in the YouTube lo-fi relaxing music compilation community, it makes sense for it to permeate into relaxing cozy games. And just like it made sense for wholesome games to have found their place within the social and environmental activism movement, it made sense that it would find a spot within the feminist ecological witchcraft movement. They're the new dynamic duo, and in my opinion, that's why there's so many of them coming out, and honestly, that's a movement I can get behind. Well, that's my time. I've rambled enough about a topic that probably 3 people care about, including me. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was really fun to make and I learned a lot, and I'm sure I must have missed some things because honestly, both witchcraft and wholesome games are huge topics. And though I did my best to condense them in a way that was relevant to the topic of the video, let me know if I missed anything or if there was something that you were expecting to be mentioned in this video that I didn't mention. I'd love to know what all of you think about this topic. I mean, I've been filming for hours now. The lighting has changed. I got visited by my cat. But yeah, that was fun. Oh, and let me know what is your favorite witchy cozy games in the comments down below, out or upcoming. And I will have all of the ones that I found as well as all of my sources down in the description. And how about you go have yourself a nice little cozy witchy rest of your day. See ya.